What separates animal from man? Humanity has evolved to suppress its instincts and primal nature in order to live in a functional society. Laws and social norms govern behavior through civilization. But what happens when men abandon all reason and revert to their primitive urges? Beware venturing into remote wilderness or abandoned ruins, for you may face feral humans. Stories of wild men living beyond the borders of civilization stretch back into antiquity, sometimes told to discourage children from venturing too far from home. They also symbolized the unexplored frontier, or mankind's untapped potential for unleashed primal urges. In other cases, they could even be seen as hybrids of humans and animals. Written in the 2nd millennium BC, the Epic of Gilgamesh contains one of the first known archetypes of the wild man, the form of Enkidu. Described as a primitive individual created by the goddess Aruru, his interactions with humans generally lead him to becoming more civilized. No longer able to graze or drink among the beasts that now fled from him, over the course of the epic, Enkidu acts as a rival to the hero Gilgamesh, only to eventually befriend him before finally being killed by the goddess Ishtar after the duo slew the Bull of Heaven. As Europe entered the Middle Ages, stories of men living in the wilds became common. Known as woodwoes, they were largely thought of as creatures similar to satyrs or fauns. Like Enkidu, they eschewed clothing in favor of heavy body hair and long beards, though they were sometimes pictured wearing leaves. Their weaponry seems to consist solely of wooden clubs. Strangely, woodwoes displayed contradictory behavior in old legends, acting upon the purity of nature as they battled dragons and evil spirits, while being seen as violent and cannibalistic. Woodwoes were known to kidnap human women in order to breed with them, and also feed on children. These darker inclinations would be especially pronounced if the woodwoes was provoked or threatened. Typically solitary creatures, they could be playful at times and even play pranks on travelers. Further east, the mountainous regions of Eurasia are home to the legend of the Almas. Standing as tall as most men, these creatures are covered in auburn hair, with facial features consisting of a flat nose, exaggerated brow, and thin lower jaw. Like woodwoes, they are typically naked, but sometimes wear crude clothing. Sporadic stories exist of humans interacting with Almas over past centuries, with the creatures reportedly able to communicate through hand gestures in order to trade. Mongolian and Tibetan apothecaries listed Almas alongside thousands of other plants and animals, although Hans Littberger seems to be the first European to ever see one as of 1430. In 1871, Nikolai Przhalski wrote that Almas of Mongolia were incredibly strong, with black hair and clawed appendages. Regardless of what region they inhabited, locals held them in high regard and avoided places where they were thought to live, even avoiding naming Almas directly, and instead using various colloquialisms. A particularly curious case occurred in the mountains of the Caucasus in 1850. Capturing a violent woman in the wilderness, the villagers would name her Zana, with many suspecting her of being an Almas due to her unusual appearance. Over time, the feral Zana became somewhat domesticated and even had children with a local man despite their glaring differences. Several of her offspring would perish as infants, although the survivors appeared to be normal humans. Zana would pass away in 1890, leaving anthropologists puzzled as to whether she was merely a member of an isolated tribe or an entirely different branch of human evolution. As time passed, civilization has pushed deeper into nature's domain. Modern science has diagnosed mental illness or genetic defects to explain abnormal behavior. Even in this age, however, people still whisper about what bestial humanoids lurk in the darkness of the wilderness. National parks are a hotbed of disappearances. This was demonstrated by the case of Dennis Martin in 1969. The 6-year-old was on a family trip to the Great Smoky Mountains, straddling the Tennessee-North Carolina border, when he vanished while playing with other children. Despite an exhaustive search of the area by the Green Berets, no trace of Dennis was ever found. Amid several theories surrounding his disappearance was that he fell victim to feral humans that live in the region. Supposedly, they steal livestock, speak their own language, and have cannibalistic tendencies, possibly having descended from Civil War deserters or Aboriginal tribes that escaped the Trail of Tears generations ago. Though disappearances in the Smoky Mountains have been a source of debate, Appalachian locals fear what may inhabit their own wilderness. Believed to be descendants of the original settlers of the area, if not primeval humans from prehistory, missing hikers and campers are often thought to have fallen prey to these mountain devils. Like the woodwoes of olden times, they are thought to live in harmony with nature despite their often savage and territorial traits. Conspiracy theories state that national parks are used as a protected government habitat for these creatures. Rural areas are not the only locations rumors of animalistic humans abound. The sewers and tunnels extending under major cities serve as a refuge for the homeless population escaping the violence and harsh elements above ground. Known as mole people, their tragic circumstances are the source of urban legends. Adelaide, Australia's urban explorers are drawn to the Hindley Street catacombs, specifically Belle Lee's Cave. Located under a local arcade, the cave is supposedly haunted, as well as a portal to hell. Additionally, some believe a colony of deformed humans dwell down here, victims of government experimentation, with skin too sensitive to withstand the sunlight above ground. Adventurers to the catacombs claim to have found traces of these mole people, some saying they feed on the flesh of trespassers. A mecca for urban legends in its own right, New York City's underground is not to be overlooked. Numerous members of the homeless population take refuge here, but there are rumors that more sinister things live in the deep subterranean darkness. Struggling to survive, some were driven to thievery and cannibalism, forming societies that shun the surface world and even worship supernatural entities that also reside in the tunnels. Children raised by wild animals have appeared in mythology, seemingly intended to symbolize barbarism or communion with nature. Realistically, such children left to fend for themselves would quickly perish. However, documented cases of human young surviving among packs of beasts do exist. A group of hunters were tracking a wolf in the forest of Uttar Pradesh, India, during the February of 1872. Coming upon a cave where their prey had taken shelter, they waited outside only to be shocked by what emerged. A 6-year-old boy moved on all fours, caked with dirt and mimicking the behavior of the wolves. Though the pack was protective of the child, the hunters managed to isolate him and transport him back to their village. It is unknown whether the child they found was abandoned or separated from his family some other way, although he came to be known as Dina Sanichar. Growing up at the orphanage was difficult for him since he was not able to communicate verbally and operated largely on instinct. At first, Dina only ate raw meat and had to be gradually introduced to a normal diet. Although he never learned to speak, He would go on to become a heavy smoker and eventually die from tuberculosis at age 34. It is likely that the life of Dina Sanichar acted as an inspiration for Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book, since it closely mirrored that of the young protagonist, Mowgli. It was nearly a century earlier, in distant Aveyron, France, where sightings of a young child in the woods were first reported in 1794. Although he was initially captured by a trio of hunters in 1797 and sent to live with a widow, the feral child would escape and return to the woods after a week. During this time, he only seemed to eat either raw vegetables or once he cooked himself. It would not be until January 1800 that some shoemakers would encounter the naked boy again, only to have him run away and appear at a Saint-Cernin-sur-Rance dyer's house a week later. Walking on all fours, the child was determined to be roughly 12 years old, had excessive body hair, numerous scars, erratic movements, and seemed to be a deaf mute. A physician named Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard would eventually dub the boy as simply Victor. His heritage could only be a source of conjecture, although some rumors claimed Victor was the illegitimate son of a notaire and had been abandoned in the woods. Like Dina Sanichar, Victor of Aveyron had a challenging time integrating into human society, despite philosophers at the time theorizing that a child raised without the corrupting influence of civilization would be pure, gentle, and selfless. Victor ignored anyone not of interest to him, and had a habit of urinating and defecating wherever he was at the moment. He seemed to be unbothered by the cold, and even enjoyed running barefoot in the snow. Attempts to educate him only succeeded in teaching him 3 words, although he eventually started wearing clothes and practicing hygiene. Victor may have died from pneumonia in 1828, but he proved to be a valuable early case study in the development of the human mind. Oksana Malaya was only 9 years old when she lived with her alcoholic father in an impoverished Ukrainian village in the 1980s. Neglected, she was found living with a fiercely protective pack of stray dogs to survive the cold, which she imitated by walking on all fours, licking herself and barking. She was immediately removed from the home upon being discovered by social services and sent to live in a foster home, making her case famous as one of the more modern instances of feral children. Through years of extensive therapy, Oksana gradually learned to speak, although she suffers from permanent intellectual difficulties. She was awkwardly reunited with her father and half-sister in 2006 and works on a farm milking cows. When lonely, Oksana admits she will walk on her hands and knees and still enjoys spending time with dogs. Historically, feral humans could be likened to tales of the Wendigo or Bigfoot. In a contemporary context, mental illness or isolation would be a far more common explanation. In any case, if you do meet a naked, hairy person in the woods, it would not be advisable to follow them home.